Well, Stephen Marshall led the Liberals back into government in South Australia back in 2018. He's had a successful term as Premier in terms of economic development in this state, yet the polls are saying he's in grave danger of losing the election this Saturday, becoming a one-term Premier. He joins me now from the city centre in Adelaide at a place called Lot 14. Thanks for joining us, Stephen. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Lot 14 and why it's so important to you and your political record?
Well, good afternoon, Chris, and welcome back to Adelaide. Yes, I'm down at Lot 14. It's the site of the old Royal Adelaide Hospital. The previous government closed this hospital. They moved it down to the other end of North Terrace. They sold this off to property developers for 1,300 apartments. We reversed that decision. We've now transformed it into, I think, one of the most exciting urban renewable projects in the entire country. Behind me, we've got the Australian Space Agency, the Smart Satellite Cooperative Research Centre, we've got the Australian Institute of Machine Learning, the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre. We've got hundreds of businesses, start-ups, scale-ups. We're building satellites on this site, and it really is emblematic of what's happened in South Australia, the transformation of our economy. We're in the slow lane for such a long period of time with Labor in power for 16 years with a massive handbrake on our economy. It's moving very quickly now, and in fact, South Australia is the fastest growing economy in the country for the very first time ever.
Well, you had a bit of a setback today with the latest unemployment figures coming out. South Australia's rate going to 5%, the highest unemployment rate in the country. But there's no doubt that what you say about the economy and the vibrancy of Adelaide is true. And I've seen it and heard about it a lot from people over the Christmas and over the past couple of days. People are excited
Chris,
about what's happening in South Australia. But what I want to ask, though, Premier, is this, and that is, if this is happening, with this, you can answer the question in a second, but the question is, with all this happening, why are you under threat, then, of losing the election on Saturday? If it's as good as you say, and as it seems to be, why wouldn't people be rushing to return you to government?
Well, first of all, can I say that today the employment figures came out and it confirmed that we have got record full-time employment in South Australia. We created 7,700 jobs last month, and that's before we removed all of the restrictions that came off earlier this month. So we've had a massive surge in the participation rate in South Australia. That has moved the unemployment rate slightly up in South Australia, but overall we've got record jobs, record exports, record investment in South Australia. Most importantly, we've switched off that brain drain that existed over 16 years of Labor. So this is a really important election. It's not over. Polls have been very, very wrong here in Australia and right around the world. I think when people go into that voting booth on Saturday, they've got to think about what's in their best interests. Some people are grumpy about the management of COVID here in South Australia, probably right around the world. But I think when they go into that booth, they're going to be saying to themselves, what is in their best interest? What is in their families' best interest? And we've been delivering for South Australia since the day we were elected.
When you talk about people being grumpy about pandemic management, is this where you surrendered leadership of the state? Did you outsource the leadership to your Police Commissioner, Grant Stevens, and your Chief Medical Officer, Nicola Spurrier, who are front and centre making all the key decisions?
Look, we made them as a team. We said right from day one we wanted to listen to science and evidence. We didn't tell anybody to drink bleach. In fact, what we said to people was that we will give them an evidence-based response, and that's what we've delivered. We've had the fewest days in lockdown. As I said, we've had the fastest growing economy in the country right throughout this coronavirus. In fact, we massively improved employment in South Australia during the coronavirus. Our kids were at school. Our NAPLAN test results have improved. Yes, of course, there were things that we got wrong. Every place in the country, every place in the world didn't handle it perfectly. But overall, I think in South Australia, we came out best. As I said, the fewest days in lockdown of any state in the country. Of course, we were the first of the non-lockdown states to open our borders. We got some criticism for that, but we knew it was the right thing to do for South Australia overall. We'd prepared our health system. We created the equivalent of another 393 beds in our health system. And of course, we opened those borders. Omicron came along, but our economy now, of course, is moving in the right direction again.
But the point is, out of all the premiers, you're the one who stepped back from leadership most. You had Nicola Spurrier and Grant Stevens effectively in the front running the state during the pandemic, and it enabled Peter Malinauskas, the Labor leader, to make this very cut-through point, I thought, last night at the Sky News Leaders Forum.
The only time that this government has looked any good was when other people were in charge of it. Grant Stevens and Nicola Spurrier.
The question then, Stephen Marshall, is whether that was a mistake for you not to be up front running the state rather than handing it over to those two.
Look, as I said, we worked in a team environment. We all had our role to do. Nicola Spurrier and Grant Stevens didn't lower energy prices, water prices, the emergency services levy in South Australia. They didn't wipe out all payroll tax on small business in South Australia. What we did over the last 4 years was keep our state safe, but also our economy strong. It's the fastest growing economy in the country for the very first time ever. And Chris, can I tell you, next financial year, we return to the black in South Australia. We're the only state, in fact, we're the only jurisdiction outside of Western Australia who returns to the black. And that's why with those ratings agencies, we went from the lowest rated budget in the entire country, below Tasmania, to equal top with New South Wales. We've been rated above Victoria for the very first time in our history. So there's a lot going for South Australia at the moment, especially the new industries that are being attracted here. National and global companies that are coming to South Australia for the very first time. And that's giving a lot of hope for our next generation.
Now, what about your opponent? He's a pretty impressive political performer. At the forum last night, I thought you did a very, very good job making out your case, but you're trying to argue that Peter Malinauskas is a risk, and he doesn't come across that way. In fact, if you had a look at the way the Adelaide Advertiser treated the forum, the reporting of the forum on their front page today, they gave it very squarely to Peter Malinauskas, saying he defeated you, a KO to Mally. This is the problem for you, isn't it? It's very difficult to portray him as a risk to the South Australian economy.
Look, the reality is he's a massive risk. South Australia's got incredible momentum at the moment, and the only risk to that is a change in government on Saturday. He's the former union boss. We haven't had a union boss running South Australia for decades and decades and decades, Chris, and for very, very good reason. He's never held an economic portfolio, ever, once in his life. He hasn't employed people. He hasn't had to make those tough decisions. We're moving in the right direction at the moment. Now's not the time to be taking a risk in South Australia.
Now, there's one issue that doesn't seem a big issue, but I think it could be a real vote changer in a couple of really key marginal seats here, and that is your decision to scrap the V8 supercar event on Adelaide's street circuit. It was costing the government money, but you're happy to subsidise all sorts of arts festivals and other events. And what was wrong with keeping this event going? It seems to be something that was very popular with mainstream South Australians.
Look, it certainly had some pockets of popularity, but it was costing more and more money each and every year. We've decided to put that money into things which are going to generate more bed nights, more visitation to South Australia, more jobs for South Australia. We've got to make economic decisions. For too long, decisions in South Australia were populist. They were about pet projects, marginal seats, electoral cycles, and they've kept South Australia in the slow lane for far too long. Now, we've been able to turn all of that around. South Australia's heading in the right direction. Behind me, we've got companies like Amazon moving into Lot 14, Accenture, Cognizant, Nokia 5G, Google, Microsoft. These are companies that we couldn't have dreamt of coming to South Australia previously. Now it's like a magnet for these companies. And of course, that's creating thousands of jobs. We estimate about 7,000 tech jobs, digital jobs in South Australia being committed in the last 2 years. Now that's larger than the auto sector in South Australia. That's the transformation that's going. We're always going to be respectful to our traditional sectors of mining and agriculture, manufacturing, construction, tourism, international students, food, wine and beverages. But we want more. We came with ambition. Defence, space, cyber, machine learning, blockchain, ag tech, the renewable sector, the creative sector. These are the fastest growing sectors in the world, Chris, and they're coming to South Australia.
Two quick questions before we let you go. Firstly, disunity in your party. You've got 4 former Liberal MPs in Parliament now in the lower house who are now independents. Largely, you're talking about disaffected Conservatives. Have the old tensions between the moderate wing and the Conservative wing of the Liberal Party really undermined your government? They have people feeling that the moderates are winner-take-all with you in the Premier's chair.
No, look, I think there's unique circumstances in each of those cases. I won't go into them. But the reality is there's been a lot of speculation about leadership stability in South Australia. Can I tell you, Chris, I've been the leader now for more than 9 years. There's only one person that's been in longer than me, and that was Sir Thomas Playford, and he was there for 26 years. I don't think I'm going to catch him, but this has been an incredible period of political stability in South Australia.
Yeah, well, Stephen, that's preempted my next question. That is, if you lose on Saturday, will you serve out the whole term in Parliament? Will you hang on to the leadership and look to try and lead the Liberals back into government 4 years hence?
Well, look, the reality is I don't intend losing on Saturday night. We're working very hard. We know that there's a mighty arm wrestle going on here in South Australia, but I have every faith in the people of South Australia to return a majority Liberal government because they know that it's in their best interests.
Stephen, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for giving me a quick tour of Lot 14 yesterday.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Chris.
That's the South Australian Liberal Premier Stephen Marshall there. The polls say that he's headed for defeat on Saturday. I would utter a word of caution because South Australian politics comes down to just a handful of marginal seats. It's really 4 seats. If, with good local candidates and good local campaigns, Stephen Marshall can just hang on to 1 or 2 of those, it's going to make it very, very difficult for Labor to win government. You could have a minority situation here because there are a number of independents in play. We also could be waiting for days for postal votes to be counted. Who knows? But if the polls are right, there will be a big swing on to Labor, and that could deliver government to Peter Malinauskas. We shall see.